mics are hot and you nailed it.
That's great though.
All right, I'm gonna call the Springfield work session to order with a roll call.
Mayor Van Gordon,
Here.
Councilors Weber.
Here.
Moe.
Here.
Rodley. Here. Share.
Here.
Doyle.
Here.
And Pictionary.
Here, thank you. We have one item tonight, which is the 2023 council retreat with our fearless city manager.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Council. So I'm going to ask you all to hearken back here just about. And for our new council members, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the council did last year for the retreat and maybe tee up some suggestions for this year. So this is not a very fancy presentation. But where do I need to put this, AJ? We do go like
Is it?
yeah, it's on.
And my battery just died for you and I will help you.
Okay, well, I'll do the next story. All right.
This work today. There we are.
Was that you or me?
That was me.
Okay. All right, so when we began the retreat last March, we started off with the facilitator who, John Morgan, and he is well known in our area. He ran the Chinook program, which is a kind of local governance program. He's been a city manager. He's been an elected official. He's sort of knows all the roles. So he kind of gave us a primer on what does the council do? What does the staff do? How do those roles work together? Just because the council had not really met together in a retreat format for quite some time. So we thought it might be a good idea to do a little refresher. And then I gave an update on some of the priority projects that the departments are facing within the next couple of years. Again, for the purpose of check-in, and I know that the council, you see the things that come before you, but there's a lot of other things that are happening that you may not always be briefed on. So I wanted to give a kind of a general overview so that the council had a context of when you're making prioritization, what is the city doing at large? And then finally, we talked about what could be some potential initiatives. So in other words, what are things that the council members are interested in? What are the things that are your priority? And then we had some discussion about prioritization and really how there were a lot of items. There was a lot of creativity in that room. And the facilitator kind of grouped them into general categories, and it was a little bit loose, but I think, it kind of suited its purpose of trying to pull the list down a little bit to a more manageable format to prioritize. I think maybe an unintended consequence, though, is sometimes when you group things together, you're like, okay, so what was more important within that group? So I would say it was a good starting point, but the categories were ranked, but it wasn't necessarily a formal, like, this is our top priority and in any kind of sequential way. It was more of, these are the things we're interested in, generally speaking. We have a higher interest in this. And then these are things that are not as important. And I want to give that context because when you're doing these types of retreats, it's tempting to make everything important. And as we all know, when everything's important, then nothing is important, because it doesn't give any real clear sense of direction. So I just want to put some disclaimer language around that because when it will be up to you in this next retreat moving forward to look at these again, and maybe we can take a little bit more time with this area. So just a thought, and I'll come on that in a second. So AJ, if you can help me, that would be.
We should be working.
Neil thinks he. Okay, it worked. All right. So basically, now disclaimer, I am a city manager, not a graphics designer. So I put this together, but I wanted to sort of give a visual representation of what were some of the things that were ranked as a high priority for the council. So when the category of strategic revisiting, and I think that's more of just, talking about planning, some of the conversation about mission, vision, values that began in 2019 and then really had some disruption due to the pandemic. So, where do we pick that work up again and what would that look like? There's some things that just need to be a little bit recalibrated. So that was kind of that catch-all. The jobs and economic development, I think that's always been a very high priority of this elected body. And so just talking in general about what the city is doing currently for economic development. And then we've also kind of beefed up our internal efforts in the city manager's office to be able to address some of the large projects that we have facing us. So talking about how those roles would work in economic development. I think we'll have a good update for you if you want to talk about that title again, because we have Allie here and she's totally hit the ground running. So and we have some projects that are really now starting to ripen that we're working on. As far as revenue strategy, that pertains specifically to the structural imbalance of the city's general fund. And we've talked about this ad nauseum, but I really think it's important to talk about not just, revenue strategy. And then at the time, the council said, well, look at also if we had to do cuts in an adjustment to make that structure come into play. Candidly, we've cut really deep as a city. And we're at the point where the cuts that we have made even say 10 years ago, we're still not at levels that cuts were made in 2008 from a staffing perspective, yet the demands of the city have grown exponentially. And we talked a lot about that. Some of those demands were mandated by the state. We have no control over them, such as the middle housing mandates, climate friendly equitable communities was another mandate. So, it's, and then we continue to grow. I mean, we really are not slowing down. We've had large projects. We talked a little bit about some of the external pressures that have come to the city and what our staffing levels have looked like in light of those changing dynamics. The next thing we talked about was Team Springfield, and we kind of called it 2.0 because Team Springfield, and just for the record, I'll name the agencies in Team Springfield, but it's the city of Springfield, this Springfield School District, Springfield Utility Board, aka SUB, and Willamette Park and Recreation District. So we all work together very collaboratively. In prior years, this group did a lot of joint projects together, and it was very project focused in the community. When the pandemic hit, the group really coalesced around how do we work together on messaging, what kinds of decision making were we doing around facilities and employees, and rather than meeting, say, quarterly, we now meet weekly. And it's much more of a relationship building, troubleshooting type of dynamic. And then we brainstorm educational topics. And also we do have a check-in with council, which I believe you had in October when I was actually out of state, unfortunately for that, but I hear it went very well and so I'm happy. So just kind of talking about what that structure looked like and how well it had been working, especially for that in that particular situation. We talked about prioritization of infrastructure projects, mainly a lot of, street and road projects that, we still have a lot to be addressed in that with the city and our pavement condition index. And, I asked our public works director about that, or our operations, Brian Conlon, about that. And, how many percentage of our streets are at, say a poor condition, and it's pretty substantial. So I'll touch on that. And I guess I would just say, to close out that issue, that part of those projects were addressed through the street bond that we just completed the final project for that. And I believe that was a $10 million street bond project. So kind of the discussion point was, do we pursue that again? And if so, what would that look like? Knowing that, say, if you went for a $10 million street bond, in essence, you're probably getting about $8 million worth of projects because of the cost of labor, materials, inflationary factors. So just to be determined. We talked about community communication kind of in context of that, really showing our community, being specific about what the projects are, what they will do for the city as far as what will they look like? How will they help people get around the city? What would be included, and being very specific so people knew exactly where their money was going and what the timing would be on that. We also talked about, again, within the context of community communication, the importance of passing the Springfield Police Levy and the impact that it had on our overall budget, not just the police department. And very happily that passed with 65% approval. So that was, check that one off the list, I guess. The other part was we had some discussion around clarifying and strengthening committee structures. So, what is the expectation of you as council members when you are serving as a liaison for a community advisory committee? And, does that need to be recalibrated with recognition that, you are all volunteers, you give your time. These are a lot of times maybe on evenings or maybe even during the day when people are at work or have other obligations. Do we need to think about that structure so that we can cast a wider net for people that could be able to serve on council? That could be an obstacle to people if they feel like, wow, it's not just sitting here at council meetings and reviewing the volumes of material that you have to go through. There's also this element. So how much is that is really necessary and what are those structures? So I think that is a good conversation to probably continue. We also talked about housing and infrastructure. Really, the city has an action plan on that, but we need to probably go back and revisit that. It's been a while since that has been updated. So that was kind of on the plus side. On the lower end of the scale, were projects that were happening, but maybe not necessarily rising as high as the other ones. As far as the indoor track, that project, I would say, is probably in a pause mode for lack of location. There really isn't to my knowledge, a substantial funding structure behind it. And there's some pretty significant gaps there that would move that down in the priority list, where other projects that are more ripe would then move up. The D Street project also was a little bit lower. And then climate change was the list that the facilitator wrote on this. I want to be clear. It wasn't that the council said that they did not care about the environment or climate change. It was just kind of a recognition that that's a very broad topic. Cities have very narrow roles in what they do within the overall governance structure. So what does that really mean for us? And we talked a little bit about, again, some of the state mandates that have been imposed on the city, like the climate friendly equitable communities. While we don't disagree that climate is important, we did kind of take issue with the level of prescriptiveness that rulemaking had. And so we talked a little bit about that. I guess this is me still. So just moving forward for this year, one of the things I think that a takeaway maybe from this last retreat was that we were really seeking to get full participation from the council. But again, that was a year ago. We were still pretty uncertain about people meeting in person. And it's weird because now there's more variants, and just when you think you're getting a handle of this pandemic, and something new crops up. However, we really felt that this energy that you all have when you're sitting in a room together and can talk and kind of bounce ideas off of each other had some real value. So I think the going forward ask would be a commitment from council to be able to come in person. And then the other part would be really nailing down that date and kind of holding it as sacrosanct. We held it on a Saturday last year. That would probably be what we would have to do. However, I think we can trim up the time frame. We could probably, if I didn't do as much in the beginning, we don't have to front load as much. We can get more to prioritization. We can work on agendas, but I think we can trim down the schedule probably by a couple of hours. And so really just need to tie down date, location. A new facilitator, Mr. Morgan, is retired fully, and it's always good to give other people a chance as well. You don't want to always have the same people, but I really strongly believe having a facilitator helps, at least me, because then I mean, I have no problem with facilitating meetings, and I've done it a lot, but you can't really engage and listen and take things in and also facilitate. You have to do one or the other. So should we decide to go that route, we would just need to do some pre-planning work with the mayor and also council members. I believe the facilitator last year called you each individually and just kind of got a sense of what was important for you for that, and how would we, and actually you as a group, define success for that day. So that is it. Any questions or thoughts?
Leonard.
I was looking at the list, sort of the agenda that we had last year, and I saw climate change as rock bottom there. And if I'm remembering correctly, when we were talking about strategic planning, part of it was emergency planning.
Yes.
And it seems to me that those two sort of go hand in hand in a way. I mean, because we've got emergencies as a result in many cases of climate change. And you know, I fully acknowledge that it was not one of the things that was given a top priority at our retreat, but I hope that at this next retreat, we'll be giving it a little bit more consideration.
Corey.
And I think and to build on what Councilor Stair was saying, I think part of what we were talking about last year was wanting to see where the county landed with their climate action plan and see how we fit into that too. So it's like, how do we collaborate with our partners around?
Yeah, what's going on with that?
Yeah.
Does anyone know where we are with the county?
Yeah, well, they have the plan is finalized, and now they're moving into like how we're going to implement that plan. So it'd be
Okay.
worth it for us to take a peek, I think.
And I think it's valuable here, right? That like the 2022 initiatives are just sort of to not look at a white piece of paper, right? So we don't really have to have iterate off of this. We could iterate off of this, or we could rearrange them or add things or move things all around. It's really our opportunity to have that discussion and kind of get to collective like agreement about what our priorities should be. And then ideally like 4 to 8 things that is really pointed at, Nancy about like the important stuff to get done. Any other questions? All right, so I'm going to reiterate this thing, that part about both scheduling and timing. Scheduling, AJ is going to put out a doodle poll so that, while we're all live streaming out here, we don't have to go through what our personal calendars are and try to sort this out. It's probably going to have a million different options on it. I see AJ nodding over there going, she's got to somehow figure out our calendar, but that's really going to be the driver of this, so that we don't have to go back and forth. Ideally, I would love to get it done before we get into the budget season, like into the budget meetings. And I think it's really important and that we all end up in the room, right? Even though under state law, we have to provide a link, right? The link really is for everybody else, right? Like the difference between doing this successfully and not is really us getting into a room and kind of diving into these topics. Yes.
And I did not think it was too long last year. I was thinking back and I was trying to think like, did it feel too long? So it didn't feel like it was too long for me, and I was in person. It felt too long for you?
We discussed.
It's a long day on a Saturday, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm very sensitive to your time commitments.
I think it was probably a different pacing if you were calling in versus if you were right, like, if you were there. So I think that's, worthwhile. And I still, from an agenda, like, that was the first time we really sat down and talked about it since probably 2015. And so it's gonna feel a little clunky at first, right? This will be the first time that we all sit down and be like, what's important? Right. Go ahead, Joe.
From past experience that I've had with council meetings or whatever you call them, that I think really I've had some really enjoyable retreats with the council, and I've had some that weren't close to that. And I think the big difference I noticed is that what Nancy was mentioning earlier, the best ones I saw was when we were in a room, and didn't have distractions, i.e. other folks. And I think it did two things. The best ones I went to is that helped with comfort with everybody. But I think it was also huge for, in a sense, so cliche. Team building is the closeness of the council members was noticeably different the next week. Is because I think there was some very unguarded talking, safe talking. People were open and honest. There was no fuzz or outdoor noise, so to speak. And at least for me, I'm speaking for myself, that I think those meetings that we had a room, we had a very neutral mediator, and I guess not mediator. I guess that was initially started as a meeting, still had become a facilitator. And there was food present, which is always for the primitive folks. There's always comfort in food. You know, I mean, from an Italian family, is that the best meetings occur in the kitchen. You know, so there was food present. There was comfort. There, you know, that type of thing. And there was isolation from any outside stuff. I think the best meeting I attended was at the was it not Sony, but across from Sony, there was a restaurant there at one point.
Yeah, Willie's.
Willie's, yeah.
In the back room?
In the back. And I think those meetings were really nice because it was a very neutral spot. It was non-governmental spot. It was, and people were able to talk openly. And I think we even did a hiring of one of our city managers was conducted in that room.
Yeah, to be clear, they have an event room in the back.
Yes, yeah. It wasn't in a restaurant, it was in an event room. And so I think that would be hugely important. I think that this last one was a mix of remote / in person. I think totally destroyed the potential positive outcome. It just did for me, and I'm guilty. I was remote. I think I was in Arizona, but I want to be present. And everybody, I think, is best to be present. And I think that's the first hurdle to get back into that. So that's my 2 cents.
All right, so look for the doodle poll. We all are going to try to be there in person, and we'll have a lively conversation, right? These conversations are usually really good. Okay, I think we're going to adjourn till 6:30. Yep. So that's when CETA is going to kick off. So I'm going to adjourn this, and then we're going to reconvene in this room on a different link for people at home for the CETA meeting. Thank you, everybody.
6:30, isn't it?
Yep.